So a little birdie told me, and by that I mean people in my Discord were saying that Reines and Gray, I believe, both received strengthening upgrades in the new case file rerun event, and I was like, you know what? Let's just take a look at this on video because this is something that I was talking about. Yep, there it is, strengthening right there. I know this is what I was talking about in my Reines video. I was like, she could feasibly receive a buff, and I was like, I would really like to see her NP get buffed, and so. I'm really hoping that's what they did. I'm hoping they really took, well, I mean, I can't be taking all the, credit for it, you know what I'm saying? But, just, buff that NP up and make her hit it just a bit more different, you know what I'm saying? So, we're going to take a look at that in today's video. Obviously, like and subscribe to the video. All the links down in the description down below. The Twitch, the join button, all the standard YouTube intro. But I'm kind of just gassed up because when these servants get these upgrades, it usually breathes a lot of new life into them, and it could actually take them from being kind of more under the radar or just bad, and then make them extremely good or make them like super meta relevant. Like you had somebody like Ozymandias for the longest time, who people liked Ozymandias because he's a cool character, but nobody was really using Ozymandias all that much. And then they slap him with 2 buffs, and all of a sudden, this dude is absolutely everywhere. Like how everybody's like, Ozymandias is the best servant ever. And it's like, you know what, that's what 2 buffs will do to a servant, So I'm hoping Reines and Gray, by extension, actually, both receive the same benefit. So let's look over here. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and click on her thing. I don't like reading it down there. I kind of like seeing the change. But I did see the NP upgrade thing. So just as a reminder, right now she's lowering all enemies' defense, giving this ability by ignoring party defensive class disadvantage, which is really, really strong, especially if you're going to use like berserkers and stuff with her. Removes own debuffs, and then has this. So, I mean, I really hope they don't try to compound and like just try to make this better, because like... Come on, bro. Don't do anything with that. I would like to see that be party-wide. Bro, if this would just be, like, overall class disadvantage, if it was, like, offensive and defensive, broken servant. So, let's see. Okay, so, didn't touch anything here. Increases party's NP generation rate by, how much? 30% to 50% for 3 turns. Overcharges party's NP by 1 stage for 1 time for 3 turns. Okay. This is not bad, okay? I'm not gonna cap and be like this is a bad buff. It's just not really what I was expecting at all, but it does make her kind of crazy as a support. If anything, it really makes you want to get to Reines' NP even faster now, and it seems to kind of be putting more in a specific niche where you want to pair her with different arts and quick servants, especially like, dude, quick servants love this, like, because the one flaw really for a quick servant is that, if they don't have high NP gain, they kind of flop because then they're not able to loot very effectively. And so this is just an insane boon for any quick servant if you want to put her with them. And then it's also very good if you want to bring her as a secondary buffer for your arts team, right? Like, let's say you want to do Reines, whatever DPS servant, I don't know, let's just say like Melusine or something, and then you want to do Castoria. Reines provides a lot of defense to the party. It's kind of like the team build that I would used to do, where instead of bringing double Merlin, I would bring Waver Merlin, because it offered me a little bit more control for the enemy's NP, and he provided defense for the entire party. So that way, my characters were a bit more tanky and had a bit more control over the fight, and wasn't just reliant on just absolutely obliterating the enemy, because sometimes you don't beat them in 3 turns, sometimes you get an unlucky crit, sometimes they had just a little bit too much HP, or, your NP1 servant didn't hit different enough. But I think this actually makes her a very viable, like, secondary option if you don't want to run double Castoria, or let's say you don't pull Castoria, and you're like, you know what, I at least have Reines. I mean, at that point, you have a servant that can offer 50% to one member. She can also split up this 20% buff here, so she could even give this to herself or Castoria if you really need to get to her NP faster, and maybe you're struggling and you could preserve this for, whoever your DPS is. I think it's a very decent buff. This is interesting. I'll have to like kind of like look into Specifically, what art servants could you really like take the most advantage of this with? Because I mean, in stuff like the Melusine example, she gets more NP gain, which is, I mean, good, but with her already getting this, like in this hypothetical scenario, with her getting this plus Castoria's buff, she really doesn't need any more with the overcharge level. So I don't know, I'll have to think about what art servants you could really pair with her to kind of get the most out of that, because it is admittedly a little early in the morning that I'm catching this buff. So my my massive FGO brain ain't like exactly turning all the gears right now. I'm just like, oh, you know, there are art servants, you know, they are people, but I can foresee that this at least will be pretty decent in those type of setups. So good on them, okay? That's not exactly the game-breaking buff that I wanted Reines to get, but it definitely takes her in a more interesting direction. So let's go ahead and look at Gray, and this one is completely blocked out down there, so I can't even see what it is. Is it an NP buff? Okay, it is an NP buff. So Gray, this is going to be kind of interesting because as a free-to-play servant, she is, you know, available to everyone. So if they make this a good buff, this is actually going to be very impactful because, you know, Reines over there, you know, she's a limited 5-star servant. Not everybody has Reines, so it's good for people that have her, right? Like, for instance, I have Reines on the NA version, so I'm looking forward to her getting these next few buffs, like the skill buff and then the NP buff, because that directly affects me. I could take advantage of that. But if you don't have Reines, you probably don't care as much. You're like, sure, that's a good buff. Maybe it encourages me to summon for her a bit, but all in all, you know, if you don't have the servant, you don't really care, right? Like, let's just be honest. You know, if I don't own, I don't know, what's a servant I don't have? If I don't have Archer Artoria, right, and she gets buffed, then it's like, that's really sick. Happy for people that do have her, but I don't have her, so I don't really care. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of one of those things. So already, for a free-to-play servant, sorry, I'm like all sniffly today, but it's getting really cold. It's like -5 degrees outside, so you have to forgive me. But she's already doing pretty good damage, right? Because she's a free NP5, and then she has this bonus effect. Honestly, if they just want to make that proc first to give her more damage, that would be pretty sick, but let's see what they did. Ooh, okay, bros. Okay. They kind of made her insane. They kind of made her crazy. This is a little insane. Giving a free-to-play servant Pierce Invincibility on their NP, which is a big thing to note, that it's not on like a skill, because, you know, if it's on a skill, you could run into scenarios where you don't have it when you need it. But if it's on NP, you always have it when you need it. It is always there when you fire your NP, and it lasts for the entire Brave chain. So it proccing first on NP means it is always there for you. And her being a free-to-play servant means you now have yourselves a very, very solid assassin with Pierce Invincibility. So if you're fighting any riders that have, you know, dodge, invul, anything like that, everybody now has a guaranteed NP5 servant that can just break through that dude's defenses. So that's already really good. Or Berserker, I guess. If you're fighting someone like Heracles or, you know, Coup Alter, I guess you could also use her for that as well. But then this is also kind of crazy because it gives her a bit more NP refund as well. It doesn't completely save her because, unfortunately, this is just not how it adds up. Because we would have really liked to see this be a 30%, so that her append skill down here, the 20%, could have given her a false 50% battery. And then, you know, stuff like that would just be a bit more helpful. That's kind of just like a cherry on top. But unfortunately, it's not like that's how it's going to add up, because you got to get to the NP first to get this. You know what I'm saying? Because I know there's going to be one comment that's like, but the 20 right there, and the 20 right there, and the 10% right there, that's 50%. It's like, well, no, but you don't have access to this until you fire your NP, which at that point kind of defeats the purpose, right? So it's going to make Gray very good when it comes to more difficult content. I'll at least say that. When it comes to more harder content, she's going to be a lot better with this, because this is insane, and then this gives her sustainability when it comes to more difficult content, because every time she fires her NP, she's at least getting something back, you know? She's at least refunding a bit of her NP, so I think it's a very, very solid buff for Gray. It's like a very simple buff, yet it's insanely good. Honestly, I would have just taken this plus the buff damage right there, but that's just a nice cherry on top that's going to make her a bit more consistent when you bring her to harder content. But this is absolutely insane. Anytime that they give us a free-to-play servant that has like the ability to pierce defense, pierce invincibility, stuff like that, like the crazy things, buff removal, stuff like that. You always got to take note of that, because you got to remember, this is now a servant that everybody has, that has this really strong ability to kind of negate the harder things that bosses do, and the more annoying things, where there are some bosses that like to spam their defensive buffs, or they're just given like this insane buff where it's like, take for instance the giant Oni monster from the Benny Enma event that you could fight, that depending on what cards you use, it is immune to certain card types. But if you have characters like this that just pierce invincibility, you just get around that buff entirely. Or you have bosses like, say, William Tell, that get like 20 hits of dodge or whatever. You have pierce invincibility, you just get right around that. You could just start smacking him in the face. So it makes it really good for a lot of that. It just gives you this ability in your box to completely sidestep some of the ways that these bosses are supposed to be tackled, and can make them a lot easier. So yeah, I really like the both of these. Like, I think these are both really solid buffs. Reines is definitely an interesting one. I'm gonna need to do some play testing with her to kind of see the full extent for it, because it's definitely good. I just don't know how good it's going to be, right? It's one of those things. It's because sometimes, we can tell that something's going to be very strong, but we won't know the full extent of how good it's going to be. Like, I might be gauging it as like an 8, and really it's a 9 in terms of how good it is, right? Because it seems very strong, but it might be a bit stronger than I'm realizing, because there might be some really OP arts team comp that I'm not thinking of right now. So that's why I'm kind of like, this could be pretty good. Like, immediately, some of the things that pop into my head are like Castoria, right? If you're using Reines with Castoria, you have the ability to now overcharge Castoria's NP to where she by default gives 2 hits of solemn defense now. Like, that's immediately like something that's really strong between the Reines and Castoria type combo. And it's kind of like I don't know if anybody's familiar with a team comp like this, but there's a team comp where you can run Castoria, Merlin, and Morgan, or slash Himiko, because basically what happens is Merlin keeps you alive with all the refund. Morgan provides the overcharge to people like Castoria, who by default will now give you 2 hits of solemn defense. And then if you put her at the end of NP change, she starts giving you 3 to 4 hits of solemn defense. And basically you just never die with that team setup. The problem is that you're doing that with like Buster Servants, and Castoria is really not contributing a lot to whatever Buster Servant you're buffing. Like, say in that one you're using Morgan, she's not really giving her a lot, because most of what Castoria wants to do is buff NP gain and buff the arts cards, and Morgan doesn't really get a lot of that benefit because she's predominantly a Buster Servant and she wants to do big busty crits, and that's why Merlin's a bit better in that team comp, and he kind of carries more of the load there because he's providing more to Morgan. So this kind of lets you swap things around. You can do Reines and Castoria plus some other servant that also that's the thing that maybe fits into that slot and kind of fills the role of either Merlin or like another Morgan in that scenario, because Morgan also in that specific team comp kind of keeps things going a bit quicker because she actually does damage, so it's not complete stall. So I don't know, like, I immediately see, okay, we have kind of a really good immortal team build kind of going here between Reines and Castoria, because those two, like, Castoria loves this skill, right? She loves it when people can buff her overcharge, right? So she can give free hits to everybody. But it's just, who is that last servant that's going to be in the team comp? That remains to be seen, which I'm going to be very curious to read the comments today and see what people think. Maybe there's an obvious one that I'm missing and I should just wait 10 minutes to get my coffee and fully wake up. Or maybe there's a lot of different team builds that people are going to be suggesting. I really like it when the meta and the team comps get really diverse, and people are like, oh, well, I think you should use this servant or that servant, That's when things get really fun, whenever the team builds get very divisive and stuff. So let me know all that in the comments down below. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.